Yo, what's going on, guys? Today we are going to be tackling on an interesting tension here on this upper back. This session is a little bit longer than my typical sessions as far as the recording goes. But what we did is we started the back out by flexing the shoulder. So what we're doing is we're bringing that arm back and then bringing the leg in so that way we don't have any movement in that arm, and thus it can allow us to detail a lot more thoroughly. So right here, you can see a lot of the deep tension in the mid-back, and what it does is it actually pulls into this rhomboid area. Now, this rhomboid area was very, very tense when we started, but I really couldn't get into any of the densification. So it wasn't until right now that you can start hearing some of those audible cues, but in reality, I was really feeling it a lot, and I decided to record it. So what I did next was, after finding the main issue, I went in and used the Tuxin or hammer therapy to go ahead and break up some of that densification. Now, this densification went all the way up, not only into the shoulder, but all the way into the lower back. Going in and palpating, this tension was a layer by layer therapy, meaning that it took a lot of time, took a lot of going over these same areas over and over just to find the true alleviation. Right here you can see me digging in really deep into those rhomboids. And later on you'll actually be able to hear, as we work through those layers, the densification begin to become more audible as we break it down. And right there you can actually hear some of the audible cues and how deep the tension actually is. Now, as we work through with our elbow, now you can see how much more depth we're getting into the scapula or underneath the scapula, which allows us to detail partially the subscapularis, which is the muscle underneath the scapula. This muscle can pull on the intercostalis, and it can also pull on the rhomboids, causing a lot of tension there. Detailing even further up as we get into the upper traps, and you begin to see how the scapula reacts to that. Next thing, we're palpating and readjusting to see where the tension is at. You can see that on the upper back now, there's more of that densification. And again, using Tuxin therapy to get that parasympathetic response into the area. So now we are going to do a little bit of Rayner technique, which is going perpendicular to the fibers. And as this area begins to relax a little bit more, we pop on over to the other side, bring up the arm so that way the shoulder blade is a little bit more flexed, and we do some mobilization. So what this is doing is this is helping with the muscles to understand its area, and basically it's like retraining the muscle by putting it in awkward positions and moving it through it. This helps with the parasympathetic response. And as I was moving it, I was finding more tension. So that's where we were working on that upper trap. And you even heard a little pop as well. And now this shoulder's looking even more loose, grabbing the bottom border of the scapula. And you heard even more relief in that area. Next we go into is the Shockwave. So first things first is that we get the solution, and we put it all over the area that we want to work on. And we're going to put it on the middle of the rhomboids, around to the infraspinatus fossa area, and then into that rear delt, because that's where we were feeling a lot of the tension. Turning it on. Now you can hear what's going on is that there is a bullet inside of this mechanism, and it's getting pressurized with high pressure air. And that air begins to tap a metal structure inside of this, and it shoots out as a shock wave and begins to basically penetrate the fascia and break up densification within the fascia sheath. This is huge for alleviating tension almost like instantly. I mean, the things that I've seen, the things that I've experienced, both hurting myself and seeing the range of motion differences for athletes on all across the board, whether we're talking about the world's greatest bodybuilder or even some of the world's best UFC fighters. When I've used this tool before, this has made a huge difference in their athletic performance. Now, will this alleviate the densification fully? No. I find that using massage therapy alongside with it has enhanced it greatly. Can massage hit the areas that the shockwave can? Not necessarily. I mean, it can slightly, but you're going to be so much more effective with having a shockwave unit in your practice, as well as performing massage with all the hybrid techniques that I do. That's why I consider it more of a hybrid therapy. Hybrid therapy means that we're bringing in all of the different tool structures to give the client the absolute best session possible and the maximum relief possible. And that's why it's so important that when we're doing all of this, that you recognize that it's not just one therapy, it's multiples. That's the one question I get asked all the time is, how can I find someone like you? Very difficult because I do a hybrid of therapies. And I use a specific type of technique, which I'm still kind of trying to figure out how to gear everyone so that way I can teach it. But basically, I'm tracing tension throughout the body. And the excellent way to demonstrate this is actually the cups. So the cups that I'm using right here, I'm actually tracing the tension from the area that we found, which was in the center rhomboid, and then tracing all the way around to all the areas that could be supporting structures for that tension. So as one area is tight, another area will compensate for it, and then it creates this line of tension that's throughout the body. So after we have the cups, we're going to let them do their thing for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to come down into this lower back. Now, we're tracing the tension, remember? So we're trying to find any kind of nodules or tension within the fascia. And one of my favorite tools to use whenever we're trying to just search for tension is a fascia blaster. And why is that? Well, because the fascia blaster has these prongs, and these prongs are like everywhere throughout the bar. So it's able to find tension throughout the tissue far more than like if I'm just using my hands, or because there's a bunch of mini hands on the scrubber. So this is actually called the Pro Blaster that I'm using right here. And as you can see, the prongs help out tremendously. The other tools that I like to use after I do this is, one, I'm doing some Rainer technique with my hands perpendicular from the muscle fiber to get it to parasympathetically respond. But also I like to use my heated gua sha and my TEND unit, which I will be actually using for this issue in a moment. Now right here I found the area of tension thanks to the fascia blaster, and we are going to be working it with the heated scraper. This thing is like a mobile hot stone set that has a scraper, which is really awesome, and it's very relaxing for the client. It looks way worse than it actually is, and most times I need to just use very light pressure. Don't need a lot of pressure with this, but as I move my hand over the tissue, you can hear the audible cue, and then I'm going in with the scraper and working in that audible cue until I hear it release slower and slower. Or less audible and less audible. So again, here we go. We're going to use Tuxin therapy try to hit that so that way we can get some parasympathetic response. Doom, 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 doom. Beautiful. Nice. And now we're going in with the 10 unit. Now this unit, it is like a massage gun, but just much more precise. So massage gun, when you use it, it's going to be hitting the generic area of the tension, but it's hitting the whole body. You can't really get very specific with it. And with this unit, you actually can. So as we gotten some of the tissue to get some of that hard work, we're going to relax it now with the 10 unit, and then we're going to come back in and scrape a little bit more. Because as we break up densification, the body could get a little bit sympathetic, meaning it's going to be in the fight or flight stage. Then we use 10 to relax it. Went in again with my scraper, didn't find any tension, and thus we went into the hip. So this hip, we're using Tuxin therapy. Again, parasympathetic responses, that's the whole idea of it. And then we move in with the Shockwave like we did to the upper. Again, we're getting this solution, and then we're going to go ahead and spread it all over through the lower back area. Turn it on, and thus you're hearing that bullet tap again and break up the densification in this area. And the muscles that we're really focusing on right here are the quadratus lumborum. And the quadratus lumborum can actually put a lot of pressure there on the SI joint. So by working it and breaking up some of that densification, it'll help alleviate lower back pain. But remember, the idea is this, like, why are you working the lower back? Why are you working the lower back? The pain is up in the shoulder blade. Well, the reason why you're going to be working the lower back is because, remember, global tension also can affect localize, right? And I was noticing right here as I grabbed my fist and I went around the glute was actually responding to the lower back getting the shock wave. So if the lower back is affecting, if we're seeing some movement, physical movement, then what we can kind of safely assume is that the tension doesn't just stop here. It goes into the glute, into the hamstring, possibly into the calf. But that is for another day. Today we are solely focusing on the back. And thus, that's why I'm kind of warming up some of that area just in case. If it needs just a little bit of relief, at least it gets a little bit here. It's not going to be getting like the majority of it. It's not going to be necessarily the main area of concern for today, but it's an area there. So now what we're going to do after 5 minutes is we're going to remove these cups. Okay. And we're looking visually for any kind of marks so that way we can see if there's areas of concern. As I mentioned previously in my other videos, whenever there is purple marks, that typically means that there is a little bit of restriction to circulation. But as you can see, it looks pretty solid, meaning we did our job. We're cleaning up any extra solution in the area that might be there from the Shockwave solution that we were using. And now we palpate through and check the area. Now, as we are looking here, we can see that the body is much more relaxed. And so just to get it into an even more relaxed state, what I'm doing is I'm using the heated scraper to bring heat and to polish all over the back. That is the main knot of concern that we had started with, and it looks a little bit more relaxed. And there is the second one that we saw just early on in the video. And even though even though the whole body is looking much more relaxed, we can still see that main home spot is still there. So this means that we continue the therapy and we continue to apply different modalities to try to get this alleviation here. Tracing all the way up and seeing how far it goes. And it seems like it's in a much smaller area. There we go. So heat scraping it is. We go in, we're heating the area and detailing. Now remember what I mentioned earlier is that this is a layer by layer. We're not trying to necessarily get immediate resolution to this issue. It's going to be a layer by layer. Early on, we couldn't feel the densification the way that we can now. And you can actually see with the scraper how it's jumping a little bit, finding all of those nodules in the mid-back. Palpating and then scraping. Palpate and scrape. Until we can get a fully parasympathetic back. Tracing it out towards that serratus anterior and even in the intercostalis. Typically, I find that a lot of tension does band outwards in that direction. And just by alleviating the upper back, the lower back is feeling more looser as well. Rayner technique, perpendicular to the muscle fibers. So that way it can get more parasympathetic response. And as you can see, the lower back is relaxing more and more. And this is why we're going layer by layer. Beautiful. Seems that I found a little area of tension, which now I can visually see it. And a reminder that these videos are typically recorded a lot early on, and then I'm rediscovering what I've worked on. So finding that tension, it all goes back to one another. Now, after we breaking up densification, we can then use this precision vibration device to soften up the area and get it to relax a little bit more. You see that ball? We're just trying to relax it. I could feel, this is when I know it's a pretty bad issue, is when I can actually feel the adhesions underneath this precision vibration device, because it's not meant to be used as a scraper, but you could feel it move with the scraper. Now, another thing to note is that we move the arm in different directions. And you're going to see it done like that a few times throughout this video. The reason why we move it in different directions is because as you move the arm in different directions, the scapula will be mobilized in a different angle. Having the scapula mobilized in different angles will bring more areas of tension up to the surface, and thus it allows us to work a little bit more. So right here, what I'm doing is I'm positioning my massage stool that I usually use, and I'm placing the arm on that massage stool, and thus it can hold up the arm in a static position where they can relax, and it can stabilize the scapula so that way I can go ahead and polish through and see if I find any densification. It's all a process. And every body is different. So every massage must be tailored to that person individually. It can't just be a blanket. It must be for them and their particular circumstance. The last position looked completely fine, and then as we move the arm up, now you hear those audible cues. And as those audible cues dissipate, then we go back in and repolish. So as one area begins to alleviate, then we move the arm into a new position so that way we can try to bring in as much alleviation as possible. And this is why. Beautiful. Now we can see that it's much more higher, that tension, and you can see it so much more clearly as I move over it. So, putting some more oil on and continuing to work out. Layer by layer, we go through, and movement by movement, it brings up new layers that we can work with. And right there, we can see how much pressure that is. It's incredible. And to think someone could be walking around with all of this tension just sitting in your back. But one of the things to note is as we added more tension to the upper back,
Go ahead and take a deep breath in.
we want to stretch out the lower back to bring in as much relief as possible.
Deep breath in.
This stretch is called, it's one of my favorite stretches. It's called the iliopsoas stretch.
Deep breath in. Out.
And I use it to stretch out that iliopsoas, which will help stretch the lower back. Now in a moment, as I move through the lower back, you feel how it go ahead and visually looks more relaxed. Even that nodule that we were working on earlier seemed to relax just simply by a stretch. Again, shifting the arm. And then again, we're doing the same thing. We're polishing through. There's that 4. So we're basically doing like a figure 4 with the leg, but we're doing it with the arm. And this is going to bring that scapula on the outside a little bit more flared out in a different way. And compared to earlier, like you saw, there was a huge nodule. Now you're not seeing as much movement in the skin tissue where you can visually see it, but yet you can audibly hear it. And you can see the restriction as we attempt to glide over. The audible cues begin to dissipate. And the glide is starting to look better. And this is why we go layer by layer. Because imagine if we just left the arm in one position the entire time the same exact way. We would be missing all of the tension that could be hidden away into someone's back. And doing different arm positions and having it static and hold in different areas only goes back to the therapist to how much they care about the client. And right here, we are going to be doing a myofascial dynamic movement with the cup, where we're decompressing and pulling apart this area and also mobilizing. Boom. And that's feeling a lot better. So angle by angle, we've alleviated this side to the maximum that we could in the short hour that we had to work. But what we do to one side, we do to the other. Now, thankfully, this side did not have as much tension as the other, but it still needed some work. That's the point, right? We just want to do at least a little bit of work for it. So what are we going to do? Well, we do Tuxin therapy, which is hammer therapy, to get the parasympathetic response to the tissue all the way down and testing to see how the back feels. Now after that, we're going to go ahead and work upwards and see how this back feels. It's feeling a lot more relaxed, and we're just working through the tissue. This is not necessarily very slow movement. Some people prefer slow movement, but when dealing with tissue like the way that we've been dealing in this, sometimes getting a little bit more repetition in can be a little bit more important than working slow, especially when we're working with the certain type of tension that we're working with. Now, one thing to note right here is as I was working through the front right there, it felt super relaxed. And what does that tell me as a therapist? Well, it tells me that the serratus anterior probably is not getting enough activation. And there was a lot of tension in the upper back. So whenever the serratus anterior doesn't get enough work done, well, typically you have to do some prehab, right? You want to do some activation to help that area relax a little bit and get strengthened. And so what we can do as a massage therapist is only focus on the area's identification, but having the client realize that, hey, this area is kind of weak. This is what I feel. This is weakness in your area. Well, then they can do some exercises that can help them get stronger. Now, we did the Shockwave to one side all the way through, and we didn't really feel that much densification, and we only had about 10 minutes left in the session. But so we had to do Shockwave, but we only did it to the upper back. But you want to repeat the process as much as possible. And I would say that a lot of the tension that we're finding in these areas are mostly coming from that weak serratus anterior. And that is something that I did mention to the client afterwards. Now we go ahead and wipe off the solution that we had for the Shockwave unit. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to polish through, and then we're going to try to alleviate the back a little bit with the iliopsoas stretch. Pulling it back and just stretching out that psoas, so that way the lower back can get as much relief as possible.
Deep breath in. Out.
Now, guys, this was the final movement that I had for this session.
And out.
I really appreciate you guys. If you guys made it this far and watched the whole thing. Once again, I am John of GreaterTherapeutics. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Let me know what you think and what I can improve. Catch you on the next one.